Hello, hello, Dr. Wielenberg. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Eddie. It's good to see you. Thanks for having me on, and everyone for joining in. I know you probably don't want to dwell on the beard too much. I gotta just let me just say one thing about it though, because earlier today I had a little stubble, and I was trying to decide whether to shave or not before the show, and I'd seen your other videos, and I was thinking, no, I can't compete. I would just be humiliated if I showed up with my stubble and you had your full-on beard. But now I realize maybe I could have competed a little bit. So
Yeah.
you should have. I wish you would have told me about this before I shaved today.
It is so hard to even talk about.
All right, yeah, I don't want to. We don't have to dwell on that. But I did remember my debate with myself about whether to shave before.
This, oh man, I even joked around and told my wife I was going to find like a beard wig to maybe wear and cover up until it gets back.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be all out grow, no shave for a while. The whole baby face, I can't do it. That's so tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of a little bit of your background, and anybody who's lost and don't know who you are in ethics.
Sure. I guess I'm the godless ethics guy. That's what I've become. I didn't set out to be that guy, but I try to roll with it. My journey to atheism, I guess, is I think pretty typical, at least in the U.S. I was raised, I guess, in a religious fashion. At least my parents made me go to church, regularly when I was a kid, and that was in the Lutheran tradition. And, when I was younger, like a kid, I remember I certainly believed in God, and I remember praying and that sort of thing. And then when I entered my teen years, again, it's a very common thing, sort of became skeptical, had doubts, and just gradually fell away. Nothing super dramatic, just sort of a gradual development over time. And I think looking back, I probably did go through that period again, which is kind of common, where the sort of new atheist attitude where you see religion or Christianity maybe as silly and that sort of thing. But if folks have seen me talk about this before, they'll know I was cured of that when I spent a year at the University of Notre Dame as a graduate student, and I was hanging around people like Alvin Plantinga and Peter Van den Wagen, who are serious Christians and super smart. That was very humbling, I would say. Yeah. And so where I've sort of come out from that is that, I'm still an atheist, but have tremendous respect for the Christian worldview and try to take it seriously. So I've kind of grown out of that new atheist attitude, I suppose you would say. And I think the way, again, I didn't set out to become the godless ethics guy, but I guess the sort of backstory there was the two areas I ended up being interested in, especially in grad school, as I got more into philosophy, turned out to be ethics and then also philosophy of religion. So sort of, working in those two areas already. And so it's natural to think about connections between them. And then there's, of course, the moral argument for God's existence, which probably, as everybody knows, the basic idea there is, very roughly, if there's going to be objective morality, mind-independent truths about ethics, morality, certain things being objectively wrong, right or wrong, morally right or wrong, good or bad, the argument says the only way that can really be the case is if you have God as the basis or foundation or ground for those sorts of truths or that kind of objective morality. And so at the time when I, first encountered the moral argument, I was inclined toward atheism, but I was also inclined toward moral realism, thinking there are these objective truths. And so I was like, okay, well, this is I got to think about this, right? Here's an argument that says I've got these two contradictory beliefs. And so that's how I sort of got drawn into trying to develop or understand how there might be objective morality, even if there is no God to serve as the foundation or ground for morality. It was trying to figure out if there was anything in this moral argument, if I was going to have a problem on my hands. So the way I became that guy is basically by trying to address this sort of challenge to these two beliefs that I was inclined toward. So I guess that's the short version, I guess, of my part of my backstory, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I could imagine being there with Van Imwagen and planning how kind of humbling that would be.
Yeah.
I really Van Imwagen is probably one of my top favorite philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
He takes such a lot of the views and positions that he holds is so not typical for theists.
That's right.
He brings such a good flavor and shakeup, to the theist side of it.
That's absolutely right. I mean, he's super smart. But yeah, you're exactly right. And in fact, when I teach Introduction to Philosophy, as is pretty typical, there's a unit on, whether God exists. And so we're looking at arguments for and against the existence of God. And I often bring Van Inwagen in that part of the course because he's a materialist, at least about human beings. And yet he's a theist, and it kind of blows the student's mind. So this class, like earlier, there's a unit on whether, we are we just our physical bodies, or do we have non-physical souls as well? And so the students, as many do, they're sort of naturally inclined to think that some sort of dualism or believing in a soul and theism kind of go together. And so it's always very cool to bring in Van Inwagen as this unusual combination of views. And then as you probably know, he's got this wild, I say wild, interesting, unusual theory about, the afterlife. So that's a sort of, if you're a physicalist about human beings, and yet you think there's going to be some sort of afterlife, at least you've got some explaining to do. It's kind of easier to see how that might go. If you have a non-physical soul, it's a little trickier. And so Van Inwagen has a pretty interesting theory about how that might happen.
Yeah, I think I'm probably not too far away from him. Physicalism is very appealing to me. I, at this point, would probably consider myself more of a hylomorphist. That there's not the immaterial, whatever that is just that with the material is just what the identity of what we are is. So, yeah, this whole typical modern day understanding of souls and this dualism, there almost seems to be really teetering on, ancient Gnosticism with the way that a lot of modern Christians think of the soul, and the soul being you, and, but yeah. What made you want to get into ethics itself? Is it just kind of a trap door that opened up for you, or?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. I think in my case, I studied philosophy, of course, as an undergrad, and there was probably just one ethics course that I'd taken. And when I went off to grad school, this is at the University of Massachusetts, I wasn't really sure, really what I was doing, but what areas in philosophy I kind of wanted to, get into. And I think in my case, what ended up happening was there was a particular professor at UMass at the time, Fred Feldman, who I was more drawn to him and the way he did philosophy. He had the sort of analytic style of this very clear, careful way of doing philosophy. And he specialized in ethics. So I ended up sort of getting drawn into ethics because I just wanted to take all the classes that Fred Feldman was teaching, basically. I just really liked his way of doing philosophy. And he did a lot of ethics, so I kind of ended up doing a lot of ethics. So that's how that went. Although I think, so in ethics, even though I started out, sort of through Feldman's teaching and what he was focused on, he was really interested in utilitarianism, and I've kind of turned away from that. So early on, I was studying all, about 20,000 different forms of utilitarianism. So I was sort of immersed in that. But but then, as you probably can tell, my main interest ended up being at least partly in like meta ethics and these questions of, can there be objective morality? If so, what might its foundation be? That kind of thing. And then philosophy of religion, initially, it just had the coolest puzzles. So there's all these great logical puzzles. One of the first topics I worked on was omnipotence, just trying to understand omnipotence, where, there's a sort of category of puzzle arising from the fact that theists want to say that, of course, God is omnipotent, and yet they also want to say that typically that there are lots of things that he can't do. And so just trying to understand then what omnipotence might be and how it could be compatible with not being able to do certain things is just a kind of a cool puzzle. So I got into ethics mainly through Feldman, and then I got into philosophy of religion mainly through the cool puzzles that it has, like trying to understand omnipotence. And then that kind of, and as I was explaining before, the moral argument connects those two fields in a pretty interesting way. So yeah, that's kind of how it went.
Yeah, that just kind of seems the way that philosophy goes. It's there's so much overlap in so many different areas, and being ADHD, I'm terrible about right now. My series on epistemology, I'm going over belief. Well, that is so intertwined with philosophy of mind. Yeah. I'm like veering off into, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, let's get it back over here. We're not doing philosophy of mind. And it definitely can pull you in a ton of different directions.
That's absolutely right. It's often the different areas are often interconnected. Another thing I think that you'll notice when you start looking at these different areas, you see a lot of the same kinds of arguments in slightly different forms that are reappearing. So I teach at Depauw, where I teach the philosophy of mind course. I don't really write very much in philosophy of mind, but I've learned about it in order to teach this class. And there are a lot of sort of parallel arguments in philosophy of mind that have sort of correspond to certain arguments and debates in like meta ethics. So it's often very fruitful. You can find like insights and connections in kind of surprising ways, but yeah, there's a lot of rabbit holes you can get drawn into for sure. You're working on one thing and it takes a turn and you end up somewhere else.
That's quite often when I talk with people about who aren't into philosophy, and they're like, well, it's just a bunch of people thinking about thinking, and and I'm like, well, yeah. I said, here's the thing: take a shattered piece of glass, like you see in an automobile, that safety glass. There's like a million little cracks in it. Mm-hmm. Well, find one crack out of all these million, and the philosophers will spend their entire career on this one crack. It's just, there's so many different other places to go, and it can be overwhelming. Somebody doesn't have a vision. That's
very true. And I guess you mentioned like sort of impatience or skepticism about philosophy, which I totally get. I love philosophy, of course, but even at a certain point, I'll hit my limit, like for the day or something. Like, okay, I've had enough philosophy for the day. I always think of David Hume, 1700s Scottish philosopher, has this great line where he says something like, "Be a philosopher, but amidst all your philosophy, be still a man." Man meaning human, like a person. So you definitely want to try to find that balance. I think another thing I would add is I do think philosophy is at its best when it's really combined with or informed by some empirical stuff. So before the show, we were talking a bit about psychology and moral psychology. So I think ethics, for example, there's a ton of stuff happening in psychology that's very relevant to thinking about ethics, especially if you want to think about virtue and character. You got to have some understanding of what the human mind is like and sort of how it works. So I think, and in fact, at Depauw, I encourage our philosophy majors to be double majors so that they sort of combine a philosophy going with something else. I think that's when philosophy is really at its best.
Yeah, that's though I'm not like super into Thomism, that's kind of one of the things that drew me to Aquinas was his kind of trying to marry the rationalism with the empiricism. And to me that it was such a breath of fresh air because historically you have the rationalists, which are rationalists, and then the empiricists, which are empiricists. And it's like nobody kind of wants to come in the middle. Let's put it together.
That's a great point. I think Aquinas is a great connection of sort of what I'm thinking of, because I mean it seems, I suppose, old fashioned at this looking back now, but at that time he was basically trying to combine Aristotle and Christianity. But at that time, Aristotle was the best science. So really what he was doing was trying to combine, Christianity with science, the best science at the time. So yeah, he wasn't just sort of, divorced from reality, thinking on his own. He did a lot of thinking, of course, but he was trying to inform it with like the best science of the time. The science has just changed, right? I guess that's my take on it anyway. But I think his basic method is, I think, a good way of going about it. You can't have philosophy just sort of isolated. I mean, it's maybe obvious, but from what science has to say, for example.
Yeah, and then of course, he goes off into this super deep, abstract kind of thinking, and I'm just like, man,
there's a lot of distinctions that
it's he's not as bad as later on Hegel, but he's, I did a little somebody had mentioned a while back about I'm used to hearing dialectical, or having dialectical conversations or debates or things like that. And somebody had mentioned Hegel's dialectics. And oh my gosh, was that I read, several papers like 3 times and watched like 4 YouTube videos from instructors over and over to kind of really wrap my head around.
Yeah.
So
yeah, when it comes to Hegel, I guess my only request is don't ask me to explain anything in Hegel. It's funny, I actually took a class in Hegel as an undergrad, and I feel like I understood a few things, but that was a long time ago. But the one thing that stuck with me, I remember the professor had this great line where he said, okay, if you're reading Hegel and you don't understand what he's saying, just read faster. His advice. I guess that way you just finish the reading at least.
That's definitely one way to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a friend of mine who's an atheist that considers himself Hegelian. And I'm just like, why? Why? That's the only response that I have there.
Well, it'd be interesting to, it's got to be an interesting guy to talk to. And I think if I were talking to him, I just want to explain, okay, well, you're a Hegelian. Like, what is it? What does that mean? What are you committed to as a Hegelian? Just, that would kind of be the first question, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, it's funny because people say, well, if you can't explain it in easy terms, then you really don't understand it. And it's like, no, that's not how, there's more continental kind of, there's a lot of concepts there. I fully understand it, as well as I can, but there's no possible way I could explain to somebody, exactly what I know what he means, but I can't tell you what he means. So, yeah.
Right.
So being, so is it still in academia, is it still pretty predominantly more realists and the ethics as it has been traditionally?
That's a good question. There are these surveys now of professional philosophers that happen from time to time, and I haven't actually like Phil surveys or something. I haven't checked the results of the latest one, but so I'm just sort of guessing. So if I'm wrong, I acknowledge that this is like sort of a guess. But my sense is that probably some kind of moral realism maybe is the majority position, but I'd be surprised. I don't know if it's the dominant. There are plenty of skeptics or what are often called error theorists.
Yes, that is.
Think that
it's like the new hot thing.
Yeah, so that camp is still around. That goes back to a figure that people may know, John Mackey, in the history of philosophy. Yeah. He's a sort of famous defender of the problem of evil, but he was also a so-called error theorist, where he thought that when ordinary people talked about right and wrong and good and evil, they were trying to describe an objective reality, but Mackey just thought that there was no objective reality there to be described. So they were just systematically mistaken. Like if people talk about like witches, assuming there are no witches and there's all this witch talk, it's not really describing any objective aspect of morality. So that position is certainly still around. But I think so on the one hand, I like if it's true what I said, that moral realism is the dominant or majority position, that's misleading in a way, because in the moral realist camp, there's a lot of disagreement about what it's like. Okay, we think objective morality exists, but then the next question is, okay, well, what is it? Then you get lots of disagreements. So the fact that there are all these moral realists is beneath that is a lot of disagreement about, like, to put it very roughly, like what this objective morality is kind of made out of.
Yeah.
And I think there, at least as I see it, there are kind of three main positions. I would say one is two of them are what you might describe as like reductive positions, where they say, yeah, there's objective morality. These sort of moral features, ethical features are actual objective features of the world. Certain things are right and wrong, good and evil. But one option, a kind of naturalist reductive option, says that, well, in the end, these things are, these moral features are really just like natural features of things that could be studied by the empirical sciences. So I think Sam Harris, for example, folks may know, I think would be in that camp, where he thinks that, as I recall, goodness is just like human flourishing or happiness or something like that. And then there would be a kind of theist camp, which interestingly is at least partly a sort of reductive view, where some in that camp, they think, yeah, there are these objective moral features of things, but they're really just features of God or divine features or something like that. So it's actually, it's a reductive view also, but of a very different kind. And then there's the camp I'm in, which says, well, these moral features are just their own kind of things. So they're like a third thing. They don't really reduce to anything else. And that's where this camp that I'm in is sometimes described or labeled as non-naturalism. And that's what the non-naturalism is trying to get across. Moral features, they probably depend on the natural features of things, but there's something over and above the natural features of things.
So, which, as we were talking, would be pretty similar to Schaefer-Landau's view.
That's right, yeah.
But he, for some reason, he was very reluctant to say Platonism. What is, and it's not just him. I've talked to several non-naturalists that just wanted to avoid being labeled as, Platonist. Is it just because of the common misunderstandings of Platonism, or the caricatures that a lot of people have? Because I think that if I was not a theist, I would probably be a Platonist.
Yeah. So I think this is something I watched your interview with Schaefer-Landau. It was great, I thought. And one of the things that came up is the two of you were talking about all the isms in philosophy and just the importance of a lot of these isms can mean different things. And I think Platonism is one. Naturalism is certainly another. So I don't mind. I've called myself a Platonist before, but we just want to be, what do I mean when I describe myself as a Platonist? I suspect people may be reluctant because Plato is so that, you think Plato, you think of the forms, which I don't know how much we want to get into this, but very, very roughly, the theory of forms is this idea that you have in the physical or material world, you have all these different particular objects, and they all fall into different categories. So you've got all these things that are often very different from one another that, consider a bunch of chairs, which could be different from one another, but we think they're all chairs. Same with like dogs and so on. And so Plato thought, okay, for each of these categories, there is a non-physical ideal perfect version of that thing. So there's like the form of a chair, a perfect chair, which is not itself a physical chair. And this is supposed to explain like why all these different physical things are chairs. They somehow resemble, or as he said, they're like imperfect copies of the ideal perfect chair, which exists in some mysterious realm outside of the physical world. Okay, anyway, so I think a lot of people today don't really believe in forms the way Plato believed in them. And so that, I would guess, is why they kind of want to shy away from people label you a Platonist and then, but I don't believe in forms the way Plato did. So I'm not really a Platonist in that sense. So that might be part of what's going on. That's kind of I don't really believe in forms like that either. That's probably I should
the chairness or the tableness. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, not only that, I was thinking it was, along the lines also of having to deal with, like the interaction problem, between the realm of the forms and the material world. And it just seemed to probably bring more baggage and kind of go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, so Plato thought that these somewhat mysterious, non-physical, ideal forms could somehow causally impact the physical world. And yeah, it's pretty mysterious, how that would work. So I think that's one of in general, this idea of the forms, I think these days is seen as kind of mysterious and probably weird.
Yeah.
And so that's probably why people might not be so crazy about being labeled a Platonist. So although I've at various points described myself as a Platonist, so I should probably say just what I meant by that. I mean, the main thing I meant was this non-naturalist view where the moral features of things are their own kind of thing, not reducible to something else. And then also, I think, another thing Plato perhaps is an idea he's associated with is objective morality, not really depending on the gods or God, the will of God, and so on. So that's another respect in which I would be a Platonist, but no forms. Not a Platonist in that sense. Yeah.
And because he was a realist about the forms as existing. Well, then you got to get into the one in the many, and then there's so many things that I like Plato. I like Aristotle better, but his some of the ideas, man. People today, we're so anachronistic. Looking back, like we had this kind of anachronistic snobbery, like we're so smart and with technological advances and things, and then you go back and you look at the level that these guys analyzed reality and these complete, whether you agree with them or not. I mean, just the amount of time describing fundamental things and they're pretty smart people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So right. I mean, I think you see this all the time in philosophy. You might disagree with someone and yet think, okay, wow, they're operating at a high level. I'm not convinced. I don't believe in the forms, but Plato's still a genius, right? That kind of thing.
I would definitely agree. At least groundbreaking. But now whether there's a form for the ground, I don't know. But no, um, so do you spend a lot of time defending realism against anti-realists, or is it more of having to defend against theists on how you can be a realist?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it's been more the second thing, and that's, I mean, partly because that's kind of this particular challenge I find most interesting. But I guess it's also because just in philosophy, I think there's less attention has been paid, at least among contemporary philosophers, to that particular challenge. So what I mean is, there's plenty of people on the realist camp trying to deal with various challenges from the people who are skeptical of there being objective morality at all. There's much less, it's sort of interesting, actually. There's much less attention, again, at least in contemporary philosophy. Philosophers alive today who are moral realists, but are basically addressing something like the moral argument and, looking specifically at that kind of challenge. So there, I think there was a real gap there, which of course is always exciting if you're trying to say something new or publish something, an area that hasn't been worked over as much, at least again in contemporary philosophy. And one of the things that's really sort of interesting about it is it ends up being you look at, you've got various, what I would describe as non-theistic versions of moral realism. And by non-theistic, this is, I think, an important point, and this is true of my view. I don't think my view requires that there not be a God. My view is rather that there can be objective morality even if there isn't a God. So it's godless, not in the sense of like it's incompatible with God existing, but rather it just doesn't require the existence of God. And by the way, related to that, I think, as I understand it, Richard Swinburne, I believe, has a view that's actually pretty similar to mine. So there's a theist who thinks there's objective morality, but at least some of it is just independent of God. So it's not, it's only godless in the sense of not really needing God. It's not godless in the sense of like requiring that there not be a God. Any rate, so you have theories of objective morality that don't require God, and then you have the various theistic or God-based theories of morality. And so in the course of my work, I've really gotten drawn into looking at some of these theistic theories, and they're fascinating. So it just ended up being sort of super interesting. And again, it's a shame. I think there should be a lot more dialogue between these two camps, namely moral realists in the theist side who are developing these God-based theories, and then moral realists who are developing theories that don't require God. There's a lot less discussion, engagement between those camps than I think there should be. So that's one of the sort of gaps that I've tried to fill. And it's just super interesting. As an example, Robert Adams, Christian philosopher, has this book that some folks may know called Finite and Infinite Goods. And it's just amazing. It's a masterpiece. And it's just a super sophisticated and like developed version of divine command theory, which just, it's like, divine command theory is often dismissed pretty quickly in some quarters. And I think Adams just shows like there's a lot more that can be done with divine command theory than you might think. And so it's a shame that there's not more engagement from non-theists with a book like that, just as one example.
Right. Yeah, that's with the talking about, things existing objectively, and having to have, these various explanations of how they can exist by, positing a God or something like that. I think that was in your debate with Craig. I think that was one of the fantastic points that you had made when you were, comparing. Okay, so you say this and I say that, and you say this and I say that. Yet we have the same problem. If this is going to be an issue, which kind of comes down to like a symmetry breaker. Why, if my issue, if we both have the same issue, why should I adopt your, idea of it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a great description of one of the main points I often try to get across in thinking about non-theistic moral realism versus theistic moral realism. So just to kind of flesh out a bit of what you said there, I think one reason I think people find something like the moral argument for God's existence compelling is it is very intuitive to think like, how can there just be objective moral truths or principles just sort of floating, not grounded on anything? How can they just be there? And so the moral argument or the theistic position is often advertised as, well, all of these moral truths are ultimately somehow grounded in God. So they all have this thing that underwrites them or supports them in some way, this kind of spatial metaphor here. So one of the points I really try to press is, I think that when you look at these theistic approaches carefully, you'll find that invariably there is they always have at least one moral axiom that's just there floating, you might say, which isn't itself grounded. So that I think this appeal of the moral argument, in my view, is ultimately kind of misleading. It presents it as an asymmetry, where a view like mine has these ungrounded moral axioms, but theism can ground everything in God. But I think, just as you said, in fact, we're in the same boat. We're sort of playing the same game. It's just the moral axioms are a bit different. But, I think this is true of Craig's version of divine command theory. I think it's true of Robert Adams' version of divine command theory. And by the way, this point is not a criticism of the theories. It's rather making the point that they're ultimately in the same position of a theory like mine, which is we've all got these brute facts, brute moral facts that are not grounded in something else. Is why one of the reasons I wanted to come on your show. So the idea that the theistic view has everything grounded in God, when you look at it more carefully, I think is actually not really true.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. That I think is a hugely important point in this sort of debate.
I haven't heard this language used in this aspect. May just be me not coming across it, or obviously I don't study it. I'm not an expert like you, but could one say that that moral realism or moral facts exist? Could they say that that's a primitive notion? Is that?
I think. Well, I guess it depends. True philosopher, it depends on what you mean by that. But it kind of sounds like. Tell me if this is the way you're thinking of it, where, I mean, let's just sort of back up and just think of reality or whatever truths or facts there are. I mean, at least to me, intuitively, it seems like, it's often said that explanation has to come to an end at a certain point. Everyone's got to get to something where you just say, well, that's just how it is, and I have no further story. I have nothing else to say, right? This is why, this is the classic example of the little kid who keeps asking why. And at a certain point, you just got to put a stop to that shit, because it's like you just sort of hit the ground level.
Absolutely.
Partly for sanity, psychological reasons, but also it's like it just bottoms out. And on the theist side, God is kind of the foundation, right? So this is why anyone who's familiar with debates between theists and atheists is familiar with the atheist question of like, okay, so God created the universe, but where did God come from? And I think the theist has frankly a decent answer, which is, well, God didn't come from anywhere. God exists necessarily. There is no further explanation, cause, source, foundation for God. God's just there. That's it. That's the bottom level. And I think every view has to have a bottom level like that at some point. So that's one thing. You always got to get to a brute fact of some kind. And I think the same is true of morality, just considered in itself, so that if there's going to be any sort of objective morality, there's going to have to be some bottom level of moral or ethical truths or claims, basic principles, or whatever they are. And they're not going to have a further explanation or ground. And there's a ton of debate about what these axioms or maybe primitives might be. But I don't think it's an objection to any view to say, well, your ethical view has a moral axiom or moral primitive. That can't be an objection, because if you're a moral realist, you're going to have something like that at some point. That's how it seems to me anyway. I don't know. Does that sound like what you had in mind by primitive?
Yeah, that's more or less what I was talking about. Typically like with like of course, the way that I'm used to, hearing primitive notions is, it's just not definable any further by any other concepts. It is like you're saying, it's like you have to have a foundation or a starting point.
Yeah.
Or we're into infinite regress or infinite regress of justification or, things like that.
Or in this case, like explanation or grounding or something like that. Right. Yeah, I think that's right. And just this is all our discussion, as I think about it, has been pretty abstract to this point. Maybe just to, might be useful to have some sort of simple examples to think about. But, one of the things that happens in moral philosophy is there are debates about there's a long history of people trying to capture like the one principle of right and wrong that kind of sums it all up. So Kant, for example, has the so-called categorical imperative, and at least one version of it, it seems like his basic moral principle is you've got to always treat a rational being as an end in themselves, which is kind of jargony, but the way I understand it is that it means rational beings have intrinsic worth that always has to be respected. And Kant thinks like that's it. And when it comes to right and wrong, that's the foundation. That's the one axiom, and everything ultimately can be derived from that. But now if you are like, okay, but what's the ground, for this basic moral principle? Well, we've hit the bottom level. That's the foundation. That's the axiom, and other things can be derived from that. Other things are explained by that, but that's kind of the foundational principle. Without, again, getting too much into this rabbit hole, the utilitarians think that, well, right and wrong is all about consequences. And so maybe they think the fundamental rule is like, our basic obligation is to do whatever will maximize utility, produce the best consequences. But if you ask them, like, well, what's the ground for that? I mean, that's it. That's the axiom. And the key point here for me is I think the theists are in the same camp. They have axioms. I think they're different axioms. We all just have different axioms. So it's no objection to say, well, you've got an axiom in your moral theory that isn't further grounded or justified. Again, we're all in the same camp. I think if you're a moral realist, at any rate.
Yeah. I mean, I would typically agree. If I wasn't a theist, I would still, lean moral realist. It just, it just seems, intuitive. It's, and I haven't found any kind of, defeaters, undercutting, rebutting defeaters to make me question, that intuition. In fact, many other people have the same intuition.
It seems like we're not going to have much of a debate between us. It seems like we're kind of in the same same camp. But I think just to kind of connect what I was saying to the moral argument, and William Craig, of course, is a very effective, just a very effective presenter. It sounds compelling as hell when he does it. Like sometimes when I hear him, I'm even like getting sucked in. Like, yeah, this does sound pretty good. No, wait, I got it all figured out. but he gets a lot of mileage and really this force out of like when he talks about the idea of what he calls atheistic moral realism. There's his standard presentation is a ton of stuff about how can there be morality just sort of floating. It's ungrounded, and it sounds, compelling until again you come back to this key point, which is when you look at it more carefully, the theist is actually in the same camp. So I do think that's it's an important point because the rhetorical force of the like how can you have ungrounded objective morality? It sounds really good, so it's important to kind of think about that. And see, wait a minute, maybe is the theist position actually any better in the end? So,
on that note, would you say that there is an ontology to your version of moral realism? Is there does it have a specific ontology to it?
Yeah. So ontology being like what are the things in reality? What are the things that exist in order for there to be this objective morality? Yeah, I think so. So I guess what my ontology would just be. So let's try to work with a kind of simple example, and maybe we can just take something like suffering. There's all kinds of suffering and so on, but just think of some very painful experience that you've had, and so that painful experience, it has various natural or empirical features. I mean, here, depending on what your view in the philosophy of mind is, there might be some debate, but stuff happening in the brain is at least related to it. Some people would say it's part of it, or maybe that's all there is brain activity. Others would say, well, it also has certain feelings or sensations as part of it, or maybe that's really, what it is. But those would all be, at least in some sense, natural features of the pain. But then as your typical moral realist is going to say, well, it also has this other feature, which is it's bad.
Yeah.
And the badness depends on some of these other things, especially like how it feels, for example. But the badness is something over and above how it feels. So the ontology is just going to be, I tend to think of it in terms of features or properties of things. So like an experience of pain or suffering. My ontology says, in addition to the physical, mental aspects of that experience, it also has a moral or value aspect. It's badness, which is a feature that is not just reducible to, it's a different thing over and above the other features or properties that it might have. So you get an ontology where you have a world with things in it, and they have different kinds of features and properties, objectively speaking. And among those features and properties are ethical and moral ones, which are their own kind of thing. So it's a world that there's this great phrase that this contemporary philosopher Wes Morriston used. He says the world is shot through with value, which I think is a nice sort of way of thinking of it. You've got the world of physics and the sciences and so on, and you've got along with that what you might say is a moral world or a moral reality, which I think depends on the natural world, but is again over and above it. It's not simply reducible to the natural stuff. Does that?
Yeah,
give
absolutely.
A sense of it. Yeah, like what reality looks like on this way of looking at it. Yeah.
And see, that's one of the things that why I, really didn't have a reason with, an atheistic moral realism is because, I mean, it seems perfectly legitimate to say that in virtue of suffering, and the ability to know what suffering is and to not, it seems we have an obligation to, prevent, especially if it's something we don't enjoy. Why should we, and it can be so horrendous for us, using empathy. And to me, that seemed like a perfectly good reason to say that it is objective, in the, whether it's, some kind of telos or the kind of in the, I want to say in the spirit of, but I mean, there's something else I'm looking for. But basically, even so when they use, counters like, well, what if they can't feel pain, and things like that, the reductios, it's like, yeah, but it's still, it's this idea that we don't want to harm, sentient beings or things like in that kind of category.
Yeah, I think that way of putting it is I'm very sympathetic to, so that, and suffering, I think, is sort of an obvious example. It seems bad, at least in itself. I guess it's important to acknowledge that a distinction is often drawn between like intrinsic badness, which is the badness a thing has just in itself. But of course, there's plenty of suffering that then leads to good consequences. So, depending on the case, suffering might be intrinsically bad, but extrinsically good because it has good consequences, unpleasant, painful medical treatments or exercise might fall into that category. But, and my way of thinking is that our moral obligations or duties are grounded partly in these values, these intrinsic values, good and evil. So, a sort of silly example, but you gets the point across. You're walking along, and you see a guy standing there flailing, his arms on fire, and next to him is like a big bucket of water. Okay, and he's too panicked to put his arm in the water, and it'd be very easy for you to take the bucket and just douse his arm. He's in pointless agony. You could easily stop it. You don't even have to like ruin your suit or anything like that. It takes like 2 seconds. You've got a compelling reason to do that. Namely, to stop the suffering, to stop this terrible thing that's happening to this person. That's a moral obligation. You ought to do it. You're acting immorally if you fail to do it. And you don't need God in reality for any of this to be true. I mean, that's kind of another way of sort of thinking of my view is I'm trying to sort of build morality out of things outside of God. So this example, I think, is helpful, at least as far as understanding where I'm coming from. You just build this situation where here's a guy, he's in agony. You could easily stop it. That seems to be enough to give you the obligation. You don't need God. Now, if you add God, and God has also like commanded you to help people in that situation, well, now you've got like another good reason to do it. So it kind of adds on a second layer, but the key point is, and I think this is perhaps what you were, tell me if you agree, you don't need that other layer in order for the obligation to exist in the first place.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting to. That was, it just, to me, I think that theism would, at least for me, theism just seems to fit well with having objective morals and, moral realism, moral facts existing. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that it's one of those things that theism necessitates, mm-hmm. or moral realism necessitates theism. And that's, I tell people all the time that, I kind of hold to things probabilistically. I have credence and confidence in certain things. And mm-hmm. So I would say I have, a pretty decent credence that moral realism is true, but far less that theism's required for it. Mm-hmm. I just don't think there's that, like Craig and others argue, that there's this knockdown. How could you not see it? How could you not? How could, they almost present it as being compelling. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, no, it's really not. I mean, it fits well with the idea, but it's just, mm-hmm. it's super compelling, at least to me. So
yeah, you'll get no argument for me. I think where things get interesting is Craig as an example. I mean, I think he does think it's pretty obvious that in his mind there is this, entailment. If moral realism is true, you got to have God. But he does offer arguments in support of that connection, and so that's where I think the action is, right? Trying to think about those arguments, and I think, to my way of thinking, a lot of the work of answering the arguments is offering basically a plausible picture or account of how there could be some of these moral truths, even if there isn't a God. So again, that scenario with the guy with the arm on fire, where you're trying to tell a story that's got features that seem sufficient on their own to give you the obligation, even if you don't have God as part of the story. So I think that's one helpful way of trying to answer some of these arguments.
Yeah, I agree. And so just quickly kind of on the Craig thing, when he talks about having a grounding, what is your thoughts or ideas about metaphysical grounding itself? Because there seems to be a lot of people today who are just kind of pushing it to the side. Why do we have to have a grounding? Why do we, and then you have others, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Sijuwade, who actually has an argument for God built on grounding.
Okay. I don't know that one.
Oh, it's pretty interesting. But it also relies on divine simplicity. So that's its own issue.
Okay.
But so many people just, to me, grounding, it just seems to be natural, to go from, the mind being grounded to the brain, being grounded to the body, to, all of these things. But of course, it's when we get to, the metaphysical part of it, where people are like, we don't need to have this grounded. What are your thoughts on metaphysical grounding?
So it's another one of those terms. It's not an ism, but it can mean a lot of different things. I think in the case of Craig, I believe that what he has in mind when he speaks of objective morality being grounded in God is really, it's a little tricky. He doesn't quite want to commit himself, actually, but at least sometimes it sounds like he's saying that certain features of morality are just reducible to certain features involving God. So a good example is the language he often uses in explaining on the theistic view the nature of human moral obligations is that he'll often say they're constituted by divine commands. Now, again, constitution is a little tricky, but one at least possibility, one natural way of understanding that is what he's saying is that what human obligations ultimately are nothing more than divine commands. So if that's at least on that way of thinking of it, the grounding is just, it's the way that water is grounded in H2O. Water just is H2O. Like, when, if you want to understand water, knowing that it's H2O gives you its true essence. So at least one understanding of Craig's view is like, he's telling you what the true nature of human moral obligations are, which is that they just are divine commands, the way water is just H2O.
So
that's grounding as reduction. Sorry. I cut you off there. What did you say?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I said, so basically he's just saying it's a tautology. It's, water is H2O.
Well, this is interesting. This is where things get a little technical. I think he would say it's not a tautology in the sense that he doesn't think that obligation or moral obligation, like the phrase or the words, they don't mean divine command. So it's not a claim about language, just the way, this is the water thing I think is actually helpful. Like the word water doesn't literally mean H2O. It's more that we now think that H2O is kind of the true essence of water, but it's not true by definition. It's something that had to be discovered, right? And so I think that's how Craig and especially Robert Adams really makes a big deal out of this, where Adams says, look, moral obligation, the phrase, it doesn't mean divine command. It's just that it turns out that the essence of moral obligation is divine commands. Again, kind of the way water, H2O rather, is the essence of water. So yeah, I think at least that's one way of understanding Craig's talk about grounding. It could just be reduction. But then again, I'm making these, I don't want to be overly sympathetic to these views. Even, I think they're super interesting. But I mean, my point is, again, when you look at these views more carefully, I think what you'd find is that you only have a partial reduction. There's a kind of leftover moral residue of moral claims or axioms that aren't reduced to anything else. And so again, back to this point that I keep pressing on, which is that the theistic and non-theistic moral realists are ultimately in the same camp same boat when it comes to these moral axioms. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I'm actually, finding some kind of anti-realism more and more appealing.
Oh, the dark side. Oh boy.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't go as far as error theory, but some kind of, just some kind of nominalism or something. Fictionalism, I guess. It's just these kind of useful concepts, of how we talk about the way reality works, or I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, that's a whole other, of course, very interesting debate. But as I was saying earlier, that's where I haven't done as much work. I've really sort of ended up focusing on kind of the theistic versus non-theistic moral realism. That's my wheelhouse, you might say.
Have you, having such similar views, have you done work with Schaefer Landau or?
We haven't written anything together, anything like that. I know him a bit, and we've been we've hung out at conferences from time to time.
I was going to ask if you ever go to his conference there.
Yeah, I haven't actually been to that one. I mean, I would like to go, but they usually publish the papers later on, so I always read the papers when they come out. But we've crossed paths, and I think we've probably, or at least I would say I've sent him stuff and asked for his, that I've written, asked for his feedback. So we've kind of interacted in that way. But we haven't, sort of worked together or anything, like co-authoring, anything like that.
So who would you say probably influenced your view the most?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think historically, if, more recently, leave aside Plato, but someone like, in the early 20th century, a philosopher some people may have heard of, G.E. Moore.
Oh yeah.
He I think is kind of the the hand guy. Greatest reputation of greatest solution to any philosophical problem. Boom. We're not brains in vats because check it out, right? It's good stuff. But he had this, I think, non-naturalistic version of moral realism. So, I do think Plato in some way is kind of the roots of this thing. But then in the more contemporary scene, Moore is kind of the one. So I think, again, when you were talking to Schaefer Landau, I think he had kind of said a bit about the history of, I guess, recent, last 100 years philosophy, where you had Moore defending this view, I think probably early to mid 20th century, and then it really fell out of favor. That philosophy, like anything else, kind of has these fads that come and go. So it was sort of abandoned, and then within the last maybe 30 years, it sort of made this comeback. But I think and I had studied more in grad school, and so I think he would certainly be one influence. And maybe I should mention, if folks are interested in exploring this view further, I think some of the, really good philosophers besides Schaefer Landau who are in this camp today would be David Enoch is one. He's got a book called Taking Morality Seriously. And then Michael Huemer also really good on this. He's got a book called Ethical Intuitionism. And it's interesting because they don't really focus on the non-theistic aspect, but it's there implicitly. So if people are interested in looking into this view further, taking morality seriously, and then especially Ethical Intuitionism, I think those are two great books.
Yeah, I'm familiar with humor. I'm pretty sure I've heard Enoch. I don't know if I know a whole lot about him off the top of my head.
Yeah, but both really sharp and good. Good books.
Well, we are a bit over an hour, and I want to be respectful with your time. And wanted to say thank you so much, Dr. Wielenberg, for coming on and letting us pick your brain and help us to get at least a little more smarter today.
I hope it's been accomplished. I appreciate it. This is great. I really enjoyed it. And especially I appreciate the adult beverage aspect.
Absolutely. That's one of the way to keep the ADHD in check.
yeah, exactly.
It's my secret sauce.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, we all do what we have to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I hope people found it interesting, and I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have anything that you wanted to plug or promote or?
Sure. I guess I should mention my books since I've been mentioning these other guys. But I've got two books in this sort of ethics without God genre, and the first one, and this is probably the one that the best one if you're sort of starting out and you just want to learn more about this idea, is called Value and Virtue in a Godless Universe. And then there's so that was the first one. And then more recently, there's a book called Robust Ethics. That one is a bit more tedious if you're not a professional philosopher.
It's a textbook.
But so if you're interested in, if you're like, I would like to, look a bit more into the ideas of this Wielenberg character, check out Value and Virtue in a Godless Universe. If you can stand that, then you might want to take a shot at Robust Ethics, which is kind of the just later on, same basic theory, but just trying to sort of develop it more, and it gets more into more details and so on. So yeah, those are my two plugs.
So I have your Depauw link. That's Depauw with a W, not Depauw.
Right.
And your field papers link there.
Okay.
Is
great.
On the Depauw, are your books available there? If not, I'll get the links to the books and put them on there.
I think if you go to if you're talking about my personal website, somewhere has links to those books. But Amazon is always a good place to go, and since my name is unusual, I think if you go to Amazon and just type in Wielenberg, that'll probably do the trick.
Yeah, German guy.
Yeah,
no. Is it German?
It is German.
That's Wielenberg.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's probably the original correct pronunciation. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much again. The time flew. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise. Thanks again, man. And again, my condolences about the beard, and I hope to see it return soon. So, well,
that's just another argument or another feather in the cap for the argument of evil and suffering.
That's right. Exhibit A, your beardless face. Yeah,
that's right. Thank you so much.
Would allow that.
Everybody else, thank you guys for tuning in and checking out the show. And don't forget to visit. He's got a lot of interesting papers that he's written at the field papers link I've got. He's got his Depauw University. I have his Depauw University link, a personal page there. And I will update it with the book titles. And I appreciate those recommendations. I definitely, I'm more of a papers guy, so I don't go and be like, okay, wait a minute, what books are there? What books? Because I just the books I'll get. I got about 4 of them here now that I got bookmarks in them from where I've stopped there and then went to another one and went here.
Yeah.
So
I hear you. Yeah.
yeah.
Value and Virtue in a Godless Universe. That one's pretty short. So
Yeah.
It's not a long book, at least.
Well, thank you again. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget, in the description, I have the Content Creator Fund. We have people that are looking for funding, and the funds are low. So anybody that feels compelled to at least share it for the Christian friends, pray, and we'll get some of these people helped out that want to make content. You guys have a good evening. Thank you.